Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is an educational webinar where you get to hear how 2 credit unions prepared for the NCUA cyber exam using the ACET platform. We are excited to have Dana Hanson, Directions Credit Union, on the call today, and also Mitch Peters, Redstone Federal Credit Union. They're going to be 2 of our panelists along with Steve Powers and Jim Bray, and we will go through the panel discussion after the demo today. So let's quickly go through the agenda. Today we're going to have some discussions about an update from the new regulatory updates on the NCUA cyber exam, and Jim Bray is going to give us that information that you may not have known about. Also, we're going to see a demo showing just how easy it is to prepare for the NCUA cyber exam using the ACET tool, and Steve Powers is going to do that demo. Then we're going to look at some user feedback that Steve has collected from people that are already using the ACET tool to give you some ideas of how people are using it. And then we'll get to the panel discussion where we'll have Mitch and Dana and Jim and Steve answer questions. And after that, we'll do a quick wrap up. So we've got a lot to cover today. Let me just do 2 pieces of housekeeping. One is we're recording this webinar. We will send this out next week. And the second piece of information is in the chat button, you can send Jim Bray any kind of questions throughout this presentation, and we will get to those. And if we don't get to those, we will answer them after the webinar. So without further delay, let's give it over to Jim for insights into the ACET examination. Jim?
Hey, thank you. Thank everybody for joining our call today. We thought we'd start the presentation out with just an update going back to January when the NCUA issued a credit union letter laying out their plans for this year around the NCUA examination, especially the ACET. So here you see where they're talking about they're going to drop the bar down on asset size from $1 billion, which was working on last year, this year down to $250 million in assets. And at least for credit unions that have not experienced the ACET exam, right now the NCUA is on like a 2-year cycle doing ACET exams going forward. 2 additional areas they're focusing on based on the exams they run last year was IT risk management and also oversight of service provider arrangements, which is vendor management. And again, this was based on, the results of the examinations they did last year and where they saw a need for more focus. Next slide. So basically, last year, the NCUA is mainly focused on $1 billion and above. They thought they could get through it last year through all the credit unions over $1 billion, which they did not. So this year, they're committed to get all credit unions over $1 billion through their first ACET exam. And the first ACET exam is primarily a training exercise. It goes for about 4 days. Again, they're limited on how many examiners they got in order to meet those goals. This year, they're dropping down to $250 million. That's what's different this year. So about 40% of, they're hoping to hit 40% of the credit unions. And then also institutions below $250 million may get a notice from NCUA that they're going to use the ACET tool or come do the training exercise this year. And they do that when they're trying to, set the bar as they move down the asset stack on which questions they need to really focus on by asset size. And again, it's the same thing. You expect them to focus on vendor management and IT risk management. Next slide. So there's right now we're into the 2nd year of the ACET. For the first example here is your first ACET exam. Like I said, it would go 4 days. And cover 170 questions, and about 67 documents are now required to back up those questions. So again, they will not issue a DOR on your first ACET exam if they find major issues unless you're just blatantly not following GLBA guidance. ACET Plus is for credit unions that experienced an ACET exam last year And this year, when they come back for their annual NCUA examination, they'll go back to the IS&T workbook and pull questions out of it, and that's usually driven by the results of previous exams over the last 5 years where a credit union had major issues. And then there's the non-ACET. Again, back to excuse me, I got my slides mixed up here. The ACET Plus is for credit unions that will have their first ACET exam plus need additional questions. And then the non-ACET is this where it's pulling the questions out of the IS&T workbook, like I said earlier, when they're based on previous exams. And then the second ACET exam is when they've already done one with you, they come back out again to do it. And in that situation, if you do miss questions in the workbook, 170 questions, then they will issue a DOR on those questions that should have been yes, that you marked no, or you said yes, but you couldn't demonstrate yes. So that's where the DOR occurs. Next slide. So the way the NCUA is moving forward is they're applying this over the long haul by 2020 for over $100 million in assets and above. Back last year, the NCUA issued a newsletter laying out all their plans back in August. And in that, they start discussing their Flex program, and that's their pilot program for moving from the old workbooks to new platforms NCUA is going to be using for examination. So that's going on now. And one of the goals of that is moving to virtual examinations using the Flex workbook.
Don't lose
I'm
it.
getting some feedback. Somebody could mute their phone. I'm getting some feedback. Thank you. So the virtual exams is where they're headed. I think by 2023, they want to have 90% of their exams be virtual. And then another change is the continuous monitoring, and that's where they're going to move credit unions, such as maybe this year they've gone to continuous monitoring, where instead of doing an annual assessments, they're having to be assessed every 90 days. And one of the drivers behind that is the NCUA realizes you can't wait a year to find out a credit union is in trouble. That's what they learned from the 2008 debacle. And then the next thing they're doing, they're including the ACET tool and Homeland Security's tool called the CSET tool, which is the CSET's just basically a self-assessment cybersecurity tool based on the NIST 800 that you can do a self-assessment and score yourself. So again, they're just adding it to the workbook. Next slide. So basically, they're broadening their reach this year. Again, the limitation is going to be how many examiners they've got available to go out and do these type of assessments. And again, the focus on is keeping your data secure and safe, because the NCUA agrees that today it's not if you're going to get breached, it's when. The key is securing the data so that the bad guys can't, get that data out. And that's where, encryption controls and best practices around data safety is most important. And next slide.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Thank you for the overview. We'll capture any questions you have for Jim after about 3 more slides. This is Steve Powers. I'm going to go ahead and run through a couple of PowerPoints regarding the portal we built to help folks prepare for the exam, then take questions before we go on into the demonstration. So back in 2017, we realized that the way the NCUA was changing their examination approach was both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge was a more robust examination, increasing documentation requirements. The opportunity was that they were structuring it. You knew what the statements were going to be that you had to respond to. You knew what documents they were asking for. We worked with our credit union to figure out how we could make that process of responding to the more structured exam easier. And we went into it with 4 objectives: to ease collaboration so that the folks working on the exam, and in our case a team of 20 or more folks, could share information online without having to get into a room, and increase their efficiency, effectiveness that way. Secondly, if we were going to build automation, instead of using a spreadsheet, we wanted to make sure that the automation ensured that we performed our diligence appropriately. That meant adding a workflow to the system to which the items would move through, and assigning work to different people, as well as keeping audit trails. So doing that really didn't save effort, but it increased the accuracy and the repeatability of what was going on. The third objective was to increase visibility to the exams, covering not just those people working it, but people who had an interest in it but weren't part of the process of resolving the statements. It might be executives, internal audits, perhaps risk management folks who needed to know how things were evolving but did not need to be engaged in the actual assessment. So we created the ability for people to have controlled visibility into the information and an ability to contribute comments. Finally, it's certainly about saving time, saving effort. This first round for people on the portal, a lot of the work was around automating the role of the person who has to really herd the cats and get the exam done. There's progress reporting, there's the ability to assign the work, and then the tool takes care of it. Our estimate's been about a 10% savings on year 1. When we move into the next years and we can build on what was done in year 1, there'll be significantly greater savings. So this is what it does for credit unions, the portal. There's an integrated document repository that stores all of the documents that are needed to respond to the examination, makes them visible to the team working on the examination. The portal allows up to unlimited users to really see the same info at the same time. Again, using Redstone as an example, we have over 25 folks who use the portal on a regular basis. The portal reduces meeting time, sometimes dramatically. Based on our experience, the team doing exam prep went from, at least a meeting a week to really just an online work session a month in terms of getting ready for the exam and all the efficiencies that brought. It improves schedule adherence. There's progress tracking built in for individuals and the organization that's updated in real time. Ownership's always clear. And finally, the process that you tailor as a credit union gets enforced. It's process, what I mean is, we do have a workflow-driven system. There's basically a 6-step process built into it, 3 of which are optional.
Capture help. From what I understand, the way Exchange handles journaling is that each email is sent to the archiver as an attachment to another email. This outside email is sent from network admins at arrowheadcu.org to PMA_journaling at PMA.org. The original email is attached to content multi-part / mixed. You can see this in the captures from the gateway, which start like this. From the file 04934SD3S2183D152D6410086B436 and .ml content multi-part / mixed. Boundary equals _1A6D1F674AC389CDB25999 accepted. New business relationship / coverage needed country Villa Belmont Heights to Anissa Reynoso from Development Events. MIME version 1.07 Microsoft Exchange 3290.1 ECAE 4615 BBC 36 of 6E 411090 at arrowheadcu.org. The fact that the file starts with an attachment, content type, multi-part / mixed isn't normal, and it looks like the gateway is interpreting the information in the attachment, sender, to, from lines, as information about the original message. It appears the outside message is getting stripped off before it is placed in the message GUID/release filter. Some metadata saying that it is coming from BMA_journaling at BMA.org is getting to the gateway because we were able to capture the messages with the cleanup rule section. I also see references to BMA_journaling at BMA.org in some of the Exchange agent logs we captured from the mail servers in the file name Exchange agent message tracking.log. From the file Exchange agent message tracking.log September 10, 2019, 12 hours 7 minutes and 40 seconds p.m. Receive, read, external, hi there, cried at arrowheadco.org, BMA_journaling at BMA.end. 34873. One good luck finding a solution to our problems.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. going on, so again, the workflow drives each item through the process that you configure. Mandatory steps are edit, release, and examine. The different levels of review, technical review, policy review. If you've hired an outside entity or have an outside entity assisting the outside review, all those are tailorable by the institution down to an item-by-item level. They're usually done on a work group basis. So before I move into the demo, I just thought I'd stop and see if any questions had come through.
Yes. So let's see. Steve, okay, Steve, this one would be for you. Is the portal an on-premise or a cloud solution?
Good question. The portal is a SaaS cloud solution. Part of it resides in Microsoft Azure, and we use a PaaS solution called Virtual Strongbox for the back end to house the documents.
Okay, and we have another question, and this one's about security. How do I know that documents in the repository will be secure? That's a good question.
Sure. So as I said, we use Virtual Strongbox. They're a solution provider to the credit union industry that provides for secure document exchange. The folks on the call may know them for their electronic safety deposit box solution that a couple of hundred credit unions are using to provide electronic safety deposit boxes to their members. They've broadened that technology to allow folks like us to use them as a platform to secure those documentation. And the data, they have their own patents on securing the information, how access is controlled, and they only use U.S. data centers who have passed their SSAE 16s.
Okay, and here's one more. I think Jim, this one's for you. Our asset base is $300 million. What are our chances of an ACET exam in 2020? That's a good question. And Jim,
come off mute, Jim.
There, I got it. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, yeah. I'd say 1 in 3, and a lot of that's driven regionally by the availability of resources in each region. So if you have a question about it, don't be afraid to call your examiner. Calling them will not increase your chances of being examined, but most importantly, if they are going to have you as a target, and you need to let them know, you need to have it confirmed 90 days in advance so you have time to go through the workbook and prepare for that first meeting.
Okay, great. So I'll let you go ahead, Steve. That's all the questions we have right now. And I'll just remind everyone to write, if you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the chat box and send it to Jim Bray. Look for his name and send it to him, and then we'll answer those questions at the next round.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. I'm going to go ahead now and bring up the demonstration. I'm going to show just one role in the tool, the administrator role, the approver role. Typically, this would be a person in the credit union who looks at things from a policy perspective. We call it the policy review level instead of the technical review level. So each person that uses the tool has a unique landing page that's tailored for their particular work assignments and their role. The first thing, everyone gets a work progress card that shows which items are assigned to them, how many they've completed out of that, and gives them a stoplighted dashboard about how they're doing on schedule adherence. So we can see we're green on a couple of these and just a little bit behind on this one versus where we should be on today's date. The higher policy level roles also receive an overview of the entire progress of the whole team, showing the work that's remaining to be completed graphically with a forecasted completion date and your target completion date that you set when you started the process. That can be looked at for any particular bucket, the documents, the domains, or the overall. The domain maturity and inherent risk profile dashboards are updated as statements are resolved in the system. In this case, you can see the risk profile. All of those statements have been answered, so it shows as complete, and shows on each category what the inherent risk level is. The only one here high is the delivery channels. So that gives this person a snapshot of where they stand. As the domain statements are completed for each domain, this will go from incomplete to complete as well. The other dashboard that this individual accesses is, I like to call it, it's my favorite one, the domain maturity report. It shows you for the domain maturity level you've targeted. In this case, we've targeted evolving, so that includes baseline and evolving. What your current maturity rating is on each of the different components, and then rolls up into the assessment factors and the domains. Here, very quickly you can see that they've achieved baseline on oversight, not on evolving. Then they're actually at evolving on strategy and policy. Here, incomplete means not all the statements have been resolved. And so this is the view for those items that have reached the approver step. A neat feature of this is you can go kind of backward in process and see it from the edit perspective. More stuff is green, but also more stuff is sub-baseline. In this case, we can quickly see that we would sub-baseline because of an issue in that particular category. Clicking through shows us those statements that make up that category, brings us to the one that is keeping us from achieving baseline. We responded no to this domain statement with an explanation on it that we really lack some tools, and a comment that we're working, this is budgeted for 2019. So as a CISO, as a policy level person, you have a very quick access to understand by going back in the edit what's coming, to the extent that you may be able to actually, if your timeline is long enough, go back and impact the results and maybe turn a sub-baseline into a baseline. So that's the last of the dashboards. As an approver, the main role is to review the responses that have been put in by others and decide whether they do match the policy environment of the credit union, or if you want them to be further refined. So using the view filters, I can find quickly those items that are ready for me to work. Picking on this one, for instance, the third-party vendor management policy. This is a documentation item. And she's asked for your third-party vendor management policy. You can see that this has been worked a couple of times through the system. We've now got a provider policy document queued up for review. And we've also included our list of third-party providers with it. As the reviewer, I can go through those documents, ensure that I believe that they're responsive to what we're looking for. If I believe that's the case, approve it, move it to the next step in the workflow. If not, reject it, send it back to the person who created the content to revise it, update it. So a couple of things that you do have at your fingertips as the user of the tool. There is a history of all the changes that have been made. This particular document has been moved back and forth a bunch of times for demonstration purposes. But so each who did it, what the change was, is timestamped, kept as a history, available for whomever might need to know how you got to where you are. Looking at the risk profile items ready for me to resolve. Again, role is to figure out whether I agree with it or not. This one calls for our policies of, about our open source software in the system. The response has been for significant, which means that there's a large number of OSS. Key to this, you have the option now of seeing how the NCUA is going to go about validating your response. They want to look at DRL 22, anything that's going to be EOL within 2 years. They want to look at DRL 22A. So, the editor, the person who put the response together, went ahead and linked 22 and 22A as evidence supporting the response. You can see that there's the ACET inventory for the system and lists of the services that run on different key servers, commenting, basically saying, hey, look in column 7 for the code OS to identify the open source. So again, as an approver, if I reviewed this, agreed with it, then my role is to go ahead and respond to it, and basically I'm keying this up for the examiner. So I can provide a comment to him indicating what I want him to know about the documents that are coming forward and the way we responded to this item. To understand, we do keep 3 comment threads, one for internal use, one for examiner, communications with the examiner, and one for communications with any outside consultants. But once gone through that, basically I can approve the statement, send it forward in the workflow. It comes back and says, hey, I didn't enter external comments for the documents. It's just a reminder. Do I want to provide comments on each of the documents? If I do, I can click the Open Document View, come in here and provide a comment for the examiner. So that they have some context around what they're looking at. And once I've done that, it will ask if you've done both, but you also have the option just to submit without changes. That moved it forward in the workflow to the next step, and since it's no longer an item for us to work, it disappeared from our view. Just briefly then, going into the domain maturity, there are 5 different domains. If we go ahead again and look for items that are ready for us to work, you'll see there's 4 in domain 1, 1 in domain 4, 4 in domain 5. Here's one where we've got a no response. Basically came through for us. It says we have an implemented threat information sharing. If that's actually accurate, then we would approve the item and send it forward. Like the validation information, you have access to the guide information the NCUA provided, their examination approach, any security framework mappings that were available are provided here for quick reference. So, we've got a comment from the person who reviewed it that this is accurate, it's not been implemented, targeted Q1 2020. So if we were approving it, we would provide an examiner comment. And excuse my typing skills. And go ahead and approve. So that's essentially kind of how the reviewer does their process. One last thing I wanted to demonstrate. If you ever want to know who's responsible for any steps on any of the items, or if any of those steps are skipped, i.e. tailored out of the workflow, you can just push the the avatar button and it shows you for edit it's risk management, for technical review it's the VP of risk management, policy review is the CISO. There is no outside review, i.e. this step is skipped. Our person doing the release is the internal audits, and finally, no one is assigned as an examiner. That's kind of how the tool functions. Other roles within the tool, the editor brings up content, brings in the documentation, does the initial response to the statements, pushes that information forward. If you have a technical reviewer, they basically look at the technical information, the response, make sure that it's accurate technically. Then the outside review could be like a league audit function or a consulting partner or even potentially your audit firm looking at this information in advance so that someone's reviewed it from an industry perspective and given feedback on it. Then lastly, there actually is a role for the examiners if they choose to use it. The portal has a login. They can work within the portal. On the examiner page, an option, they can export the contents back into the Excel workbook that they're used to. And that gives them the ability to work with it however they choose to, whether it's in the portal or outside of the portal using the Excel export. Okay. Hey, Brenda, this is kind of the end of the quick demo.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, we have several questions. So the first one would be, how many users can I have in the portal? And I'm guessing they mean having the portal at one time.
Sure.
That's a good question.
Yeah, there's no technical limit, and there's really no performance limit. The portal's built on Azure App Services, which automatically scale with usage. So the more people that come in, the more resources are scaled to support them. We do license the portal two ways, on a per user basis or for unlimited users. So if the institution is going to have just 2 or 3 folks work in it, the per user licensing is probably best. If it's a larger team, then look at the unlimited licensing, which truly is essentially unlimited.
Okay. And we did have a question, just a housekeeping question. Will these slides be available? Yes, we will. We are recording, so we will send this out. Next question for you, Steve, is how do users know what they are responsible for?
That's a good question. In interest of time, I did not go through the administrator interface to the system, but each credit union that comes on board assigns a person as an administrator for the system. The role is principally configuring it to work as the credit union would like it to. Things that you do is set the timeline for the engagement, decide who's going to be responsible for responding to what statements. That's what we call assignment. And in going through that process, once you set up the user roles in the system, you assign them work, whether it's responding to a risk profile, a group of risk profile statements, or resolving certain documentation requests. When I went and clicked this, it kind of showed you for a particular statement who was assigned. We also have ability here to look at it on a broader perspective, so you can see who's assigned in each of these groupings for the risk profile, the domain maturity, and the documentation. And all that gets set up by the administrator who decides, hey, risk management needs to address these 12 documents. Within the system, in addition to assigning at the category level, by the way, you can do an override, which allows you to take a particular item and give it a different workflow, anywhere from assigning different people to resolve it to skipping steps that you may have for the default category level. So by doing this, the admin can create a workflow that is custom to a particular statement.
Okay, that's great. Okay, one last question, and this is a really good one for those who travel. Can examiners use the portal remotely?
The answer to that is yes, if they choose to. We certainly aren't in a place to tell the NCUA what they have to do, but the portal supports remote access for examiners. It supports two-factor authentication for the external users, well, any users, but the external in particular if you want to turn it on. And in that context, once it's enabled, they can indeed come in. When they log in, they will only see those items that have been released to examination. So any information, any items that haven't been through the full vetting process and released are not visible to them, but anything that's been released for them to work is visible there. And as I said before, they can work it inside the portal, or with a push of a button in about 15 seconds, they can export it all into the ACET workbook that the NCUA uses format and work with it there. Also, based on credit union turning on a particular option. If the credit union turns it on, then the examiner would have the ability to download a zip file of the document archive to put it into the NCUA's document portal. Alternatively, they would have to come into the portal to look at the documentation.
Okay. Okay, and that's all the questions I have right now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead then and move forward in the presentation. Give you all a brief overview of what our users of the system have been telling us about it, kind of both good and bad. So most of our users, when they came on board, were looking for 4 things. They wanted to get all their exam information in one place, make it visible to the team without having to do a lot of coordination, homework, maintenance. Secondly, and particularly the folks that were running the exam process really wanted to reduce their workload, get some of the coordination, kind of the back office stuff off their plate, and be able to focus more on the actual contents of the examination. Thirdly, probably based on experience, most were looking for something that would help them to stay on schedule. My personal experience with this type of stuff is that it ends up being a crash project about 2 to 3 weeks before the deadline. So they're looking for a tool that would keep folks moving forward over a longer timeline, make sure people knew where they were, and prompt them to get their work done in advance. And lastly, most folks were looking to kind of improve the quality of their responses, meaning that it was more vetted by the overall team. It was a thorough perspective for the team, and it was backed up by documentation, so that when the NCUA did look at it, the odds of there being an issue with the response were much smaller. So how did we do? This is what they told us about what they'd seen using the portal. It is easier to track progress. It does keep people informed, of their progress rates, and focused on, the work that they need to do, and being able to focus down to, hey, this is just what's ready for me to work at this time. On the downside, we do have some reporting shortcomings in the portal. It was difficult to easily identify which individual was falling behind. Each person knew they were behind, but we hadn't implemented a kind of a central report that would allow the person leading the effort to easily see who that was. Nudging was not built into the tool. This is coming soon. Nudging is the automation to remind folks when things are ready for them to work them, or when they begin to fall behind schedule, essentially prompting them to come and do work. Lastly, our completion milestones was all or nothing. When you look at the timeline for completion, instead of having milestones for each step in the workflow. We also will be adding that in the near future. So that's kind of what our users have told us about how the tool worked, what they expected of it, what they got out of it. And then going forward, we asked them, if you were talking to someone else who was about to begin using the tool, what would you tell them were the key things to think about? The first was, spend more time thinking through your team. Who's going to be on the team? Are you going to use a broad approach, bring in business unit folks to touch on their specific areas, such as human resources coming in to resolve the 5 or 6 documents related to succession planning, job descriptions, organization charts? Or are you going to keep it to a narrow team that goes out to those entities to collect that information? And when you thought through, your team approach, think through who you were going to assign work to, then go ahead and create the accounts and then do the assignment. So, a day or so spent thinking through how to use the automation to best advantage helps when the tool's going and the process has begun. Secondly, and this probably goes for everything in life, have a strong project sponsor, someone who can set priorities and help to expedite things when particular users may begin to fall behind. And finally, set strong deadlines. drive the team to meet them, make sure there are intermediate milestones, which we'll add to the automation soon. But in the interim, have intermediate milestones, regularly keep track of the overall team progress, figure out who's lagging through a report. We're providing as a custom report now, will soon be added as a standard report. So that's kind of the guidance or the suggestions coming out of the user base. At this point, we'd like to open up for questions to anyone on the call. And Brenda?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, let me thank Dana and Mitch for being with us. We've got a lot of questions for you guys, which is not a surprise. And also, so on the call, you can ask Jim or Steve questions as well. So let's start with Dana and Mitch questions. And we'll start with you, Mitch. What has been the greatest benefit you have gotten from using this portal? That's a good question.
For us here at Redstone, the most benefit we had was the amount of time spent completing the ACET. We have time set apart every month, about an hour and a half, to meet with all business owners to get the ACET answered. So I was holding meetings every month after we implemented the ACET. I didn't remove the time that we had for the meeting, but everyone could stay at their desk and answer the questions on their own.
Oh, that's smart. So you kept the meeting open.
Yes.
Okay, that's good tip. Okay, what about you, Dana? What's been the greatest benefit you've gotten from using the portal? Let's see, Dana, are you on mute? There. Okay, Dana, see if you...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay. I think the centralized location of it has been the best part in keeping everything, so we always know this is the most current information instead of having it spread around different places in the organization.
Gotcha. And before, were you using like spreadsheets and everybody had their own?
Yes. And people were saving them to laptops, different places on the network, where now it's all centrally located and we can all get access. We don't have to wait for somebody to send us the file they've been working on or something. It's all right in there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because that can be maddening, trying to find the latest copy of what you've worked on. So, okay, that's great. Okay, so another question which is similar to what Steve was saying is, and what they asked the customer base, where do you think the portal needs improvement? So, Dana, let's start with you this time.
That's an interesting question, because I would have to say this is a really well thought out program, and the very few things that, as we worked on it through the year, the very few things that we found that were possibly slowing us down or a little bit of an issue were addressed throughout the year or are on a list of things that are coming very shortly. So we don't really have any at this point. Everything has either been addressed or is about to be with an update.
Okay, good. So it's on the roadmap. Okay, so Mitch, what about you? Where do you think that the portal needs some improvement?
It's the same here, and Steve and his team does have it on his roadmap, but one way for us was just the notifications. Once one person in the workflow answered their question, the next person did not know that it was ready for them to answer. So I would be doing the legwork, just going in and checking and nudging that other person to go in and answer their questions. But that's something that Steve and his team has on the roadmap, so we'll be real grateful when that piece gets added.
Okay, yeah, that was the nudging piece. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so, all right, and hey, Dana and Mitch, we got another question. How did your users feel about using the portal for an exam prep? So how did they feel about learning one more thing? Mitch, let's start with you.
Okay. For us, The majority of folks on the team are from the technology side. They didn't really like having another system to learn, but because it's so efficient and easy for us to have all of our information in a central workplace instead of going back to the spreadsheet and making sure we have the last one, once I showed them the workflow process, they did not have a problem using the portal.
Okay, so the learning curve was not very big.
You're right.
Okay, and would you go back to the way you were doing it before?
Oh, no.
No. Okay.
No.
All right, Dana, what about you? Yeah, go ahead, Mitch. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it saves us a lot of time and it's very efficient for us right now.
Okay, great. And Dana, what about you guys?
I think any slight annoyance of having to learn a new program was pushed aside when they realized how few meetings we were having. We were going from weekly meetings as we got closer to the exams to not having to really meet at all as long as everybody was putting their information in. And they really like that they just know what they're supposed to enter. They put their information in and they can just move on. They're not going to have to be able to find it again later or wait until somebody calls them and says, hey, we need this information. They just move on and they're done with it once their information is in there. So we didn't really get a lot of pushback from that.
Anytime you can save not having to go to a meeting is well worth it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right, here's another. Guys, you're popular. So here's one coming in right now, and it says, how difficult was it to train the users on how to use the portal? So it's kind of going with the last question, but Dana, let's start with you. So how difficult was it to train? Did it take a long time?
Well, no, I have to honestly say, with the exception of one person who's not particularly techie and had a very small part in this program, I didn't train anyone. The program is so user-friendly that once they were logged in, it's pretty self-explanatory, and you only see what you're responsible for, so you don't even have to kind of try to figure out if this applies to you or not. If it's in, if you can see it when you go into the program, it's yours. And there are enough safeguards that if you were required to attach something, it won't let you finalize it until you do attach something. So I didn't really do any training. We gave them their logins, and people just kind of took it and ran.
That's awesome. Okay, what about you, Mitch? And your team?
For us here at Redstone, what we did is one of the meetings that we normally have, I just made that our training session. We pulled the portal up online, and we had one user go through and log in, and we showed all the other users how the process worked. And then we just had each person change, and so they got a good feel of it and was able to ask any questions about the navigation or where to find information. But after that first training session, I haven't had to train any additional user. If a user only had one or two questions to answer, I just kept ownership of that. I sent them an email with that question, took back the answer, and put it in the portal. It was just easier for me to do it that way than to give somebody access to the portal to answer one question.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's really good. Okay. All right, Steve, I think this question is coming in for you, and it's and you touched on it a little bit, what additional capabilities are coming to the portal soon? So Dana and Mitch talked about the roadmap. I guess this will be the
let me answer that response. We've got 5 things that are coming in the near future. Some of them are in our QA process, and some are still in development. The first is the ability to add optional or additional documents to the document list, essentially to extend it beyond the standard ACET DRL the NCUA provides. A couple of scenarios that supports. The first is you as an institution want to provide additional documentation for them to consider. A classic example to me is the risk appetite statement. It's not called for anywhere in the DRL the NCUA put forward, but it certainly would be useful in responding to some of the questions. So, and the second scenario is in a number of cases when clients have gotten like an ACET Plus, they're sent a list of 10 or 11 additional documents the NCUA wants to see. using the optional documents capability, you just fold that into the DRL, run it through the same process of signing it out, reviewing it, and it goes into the archive. So that's a capability that's in our QA cycle at this point. The second one is, and this is pretty important and also fairly challenging to get done. That's focus on development right now, which is the ability to archive the year you've just completed. You complete an exam year, we'll give you the ability to freeze it, archive that year, clone it, and then adjust items in the work process to where you want them to be to start your next year. This allows you to take maximum advantage of the work you've done in the just finished year and setting the starting point for the next exam cycle. That capability, as I said, is well down the development path and will be available later this year. The third one of my favorites, is nudging. Nudging is next up on the roadmap, really, nudging and notifications that keep users informed when there's work they can perform or when they're falling behind on the work, so that we take that responsibility essentially for the nagging off of the person who's coordinating the exam and put it on the tool itself. And the last item we've got on the really near-term roadmap is to enhance the administrator reporting, so that if they want to see each item, where it is in the work process, who's responsible for it, they'll have a push of a button report to be able to pull that up and look at the entire effort. And that will give them an easy ability to find who may be falling behind, who's ignoring their nudges and notifications. And affecting the timeline for completion. Those are the things really we're working for to get done by the end of the year. There's a whole other suite of items starting next year, which includes incorporating some of the graphs that go with the FFIEC CAT tool, adding a user forum for communicating back and forth between tool users. So. Thank you for the question, Brenda. That was a good one.
Okay, yeah. And this is probably a really good one to end on. And again, like I said, if we didn't get to your question today, we will answer those. So, you can go ahead and keep typing those in chat or get in touch with Jim. But Jim, this one's for you, and I think it's very appropriate so that people understand how much the portal costs. What does the portal cost?
Well, as Steve said earlier, we price the portal by asset size. So, for example, for unlimited licensing for a credit union, let's say at $700 million would be about $3,800 a year, or the price per user would be around $750.
Which is not a lot. So, okay, so that's awesome.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why we...
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, the reason why we just issued the new user pricing is we noticed a lot of smaller credit unions will have maybe a maximum of 4 or 5 people preparing for the examination, where we found a lot of credit unions over $1 billion or had quite a few people, let's say up to 10 people. So we want to make it more cost effective for the smaller credit unions that had less people involved. So that's why we came up with this new pricing option.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so the slide now that you're looking at is if you want to ask any more questions or if you need some more information, just give Jim a call or shoot him an email, and he'll get back with you. This concludes our presentation today. We want to thank you for your time, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.